All right, so Dennis Wadley from Bridges of Hope. It's the 17th of February, and this class is on community development, comparing relief and development. So I'll give you guys kind of the 30,000 foot overview of my journey while we wait. So we, well, when I was in my 20s, I was going to Biola. Biblical studies major. Every Friday there was a missions chapel. And so little by little over the course of my time at Biola, I was just getting, kind of smashed with the dynamic stuff that God was doing all around the world. And I think it was about my junior year that I just thought, man, I would just want to go serve God. I want to be overseas. Senior year rolls around when everybody asks, what are you going to do when you graduate? And I didn't even think about it. I said, I will be anywhere except the United States. And said it over and over and over and over again. God wasn't opening any doors, which is kind of funny because usually with missions, there's a million doors. And spring break rolled around, and I got invited by a guy who had discipled me my junior year, who was the best Bible prophet, Biola. He had been hired as the senior pastor at Rolling Hills Covenant Church in Palos Verdes, which is like 40 minutes from Biola. So I cruise over there. He asked me, what are you going to do when you graduate? And I was like, I'll be any place except the United States. And, I want to serve overseas for a couple years, then come back and work in a church under somebody I respect, which was him. I wanted to come back and work in his church. I also wanted to intern there during the summer because Palos Verdes is a darn good place to raise funds to go to the mission field. And so anyway, that was all the kind of backstory. I didn't tell him any of that. But then I wanted to come back and work with him while I went to seminary and figured I'd be his youth pastor. And so anyway, I got all done and he goes, okay, now dream with me. I want to take my high school guy. I want to move him to college ministry. And I want you to come and be my high school pastor. And I was like, okay, this is 2 years ahead of my plan. And I looked at him and went, Gordon, I have told everyone this whole year I will be any place except the United States. Like, this would be the most humbling thing to then be 40 minutes away from where I'm going to school. And I was like, I don't know. And he goes, just pray about it. And I went out and I got in my car, and I don't know if you've ever laughed really hard with God, but I just started laughing my head off. And I just thought, God trumped my plan. Like, God has, and that's when I learned the sure way to make God laugh is to tell him all your plans, because our plans are just not his plans, And so anyway, I'm just cracking up thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to go back and have to tell everybody that I'm going to be 40 minutes away from Biola and a wealthy community versus being in the mission field. So anyway, I did. I knew it was God. Came back and then just had a blast. I was a youth pastor there for 8 years, had so much fun, have students now who are all around the world. We were going to Mexico every month for a long time. There was this guy I was 22, this guy was about my age, who was down and working outside of Tijuana, named Rick Johnson, who was just crazy. And he and I ended up kind of working together, and he kind of taught me about community development. When I first got down there, I jumped in with this guy who was doing a lot of relief. So relief is kind of throwing money at problems. We would go down there with like 40 high school kids and roll in 3 vans, and we'd have all these clothes and everything that people at the church had donated, and people would literally just mob these vans and just, we'd be shoving stuff out windows. It was insane. And it felt like the longer we did it, the deeper my heart just felt sick. I felt like, oh my gosh, like we're treating these people like they're animals, they're not, this is not honoring them as human beings, children of God, and I started asking around, is there anybody doing anything different? And we went down to do a Christmas party. We went to this orphanage outside of Tijuana, and I think we're like their 5th Christmas party. They had like a pile of Christmas presents, each one of them on their bed, already. And we roll in and do this Christmas party. I'm thinking, there's just got to be someplace that, we could do better. And the clincher for me, I had a relative who was managing Michael Jordan's account at Nike. And so I had this killer connection at Nike. And we went to Nike and said, there's all these kids who are working in the dump in Tijuana, all these kids, in this dump that don't have shoes. And they donated 300 pairs of Nikes, and we took them down, put them on all these kids' feet, washed their feet, put on socks, put on brand new Nikes, walked out the door, and there's not a single kid in Nikes. They're all barefoot. And so, I started going up to parents and going, so what happened to the shoes? And they would start weeping. They're saying, thank you so much. This will feed my family for a month. And we're going, okay. So we thought the need was shoes, from the outside. They need food, This pair of shoes is worth at least a month of food. And then the more we thought about it, the more we thought how dumb we were, because we're like, okay, we probably put like 5 shoe stores out of business, in this community, because, they don't sell any children's shoes for the next however long. And we started just having to ask ourselves questions about what is really effective and what should missions look like. And so anyway, God used all of that and used kind of this part of our journey to kind of teach us about missions. And then just the rest of the funny part of the story. I then got introduced to the woman who's now my wife by two of my high school kids came to Santa Barbara to go to City College. Started going to church, and the college director at that church, they fixed me up with. And at that point I was 27. I'd been single youth pastor in a church of a couple thousand for a very long time, which is a challenge because everybody wants to fix you up, and people would always, be coming up to me and going, oh, you got to be my granddaughter, you'd be perfect together. I'm like, lady, she's 15, like, come on, not really. But anyway, so anyway, there was always people trying to fix me up, and I was always like, no. So my roommate comes in one day. I was out, I'd buy and sell cars on the side to help supplement my income. I'm also an entrepreneur. And so anyway, long story short, my roommate goes, yeah, Grace is coming down. She's bringing some girl from Santa Barbara she wants you to meet. And I was like, oh, I hate being fixed up, but I went and took a shower anyway, because you never know. Mm-hmm. And anyway, ended up being my wife. We both wanted to go to the mission field. We actually, the first time we had a deep talk was sitting on the break wall by the Biltmore Hotel. And she said to me, I don't want to live in the United States. I don't care if I ever own a home, and I don't have to have kids to be happy. I've been telling girls that for years. I'm like, how does she know this? So I didn't say, oh yeah, me too, because that would seem a little too obvious. But I went that night and heard her share a testimony at the church with the youth group, and then drove away and went, I think I met my wife. And so then my roommate called dibs because he had met her before I did. So I backed off for a month. Okay, I'm giving you guys the deep story while we kill time here. Didn't do anything. So she thought I'd just walked away. And then a month later, I was like, my roommate's not doing anything with this. I'm trumping it and just going for it. So anyway, 7 weeks after that, we're engaged, and 6 months later, we were married. Wow. And 5 weeks later, we were pregnant. And yeah, and then God, about a year later, we went to Urbana, 2 people full-time in ministry, willing to go to the mission field, decided we'd name our daughter Tasha, thinking we're going to Russia because we'd gone to Poland back when the wall was coming down. We're like, this is the perfect time to go to Russia. And we put our name in. These mission organizations know nothing about us, and not a single one called us. And so we're like, what in the world is God doing? And so anyway, God ended up then opening this door at this church in Santa Barbara. And we prayed about it, and we came up and met with the search committee, had one interview, and at the end of the interview, they hadn't even talked amongst each other yet. They looked at each other and said, can you come and candidate? And we're like, don't you guys need to talk to each other about this? We came up here just to get to know them. And they're basically saying, will you come and be our pastor? And it was such a God thing. And it was this little dinky church with 40 senior adults. I was 29 at the time. And we're like, it just was perfect. It was like God had prepared the way. And we ended up coming up there. Within a month, we had 40 college students and 40 senior adults. And then as the church grew, and Troy was part of the church, it was the college church. When reality started, we had already moved to Africa, but 200 of our college students went and helped start Reality. So I always tell Britt, man, I'm so glad we got to help plant that church with you. It's like we lost 200 of our congregants. But it was just such a fun church to pastor because God was just moving, and all these old people had just kind of turned this church over, and They let us go do crazy things all around the world, and then eventually God ended up calling us to go to Africa, which is a whole nother story. So what I want you guys to do, let's see, let's do U3 and U2. In your groups, you're going to think through, and this picture, and again, we use this drama all over the world. This drama is, it's so cool to do in a place, if you're in Mexico or you're in any kind of third world environment where people, almost everywhere, people have had relief done to them. And if you come in and do this drama and talk to them about what it's like, it's just so enlightening. And for them, it's like, wow, you get us. Like, you understand the stuff that's been done to us, because it's done all the time with great intentions. But it's comparing relief, which is doing something for someone that they can do for themselves. And not all relief we can do for ourselves, so we'll talk about that as you go through this thing. Or development, where you're empowering someone to be able to meet their own needs. So we're going to have two categories. We're going to have relief, and so that's doing for someone. And we're going to have development, and that is empowering. And what you're going to answer when to do, let's go all the way down. When to do, the target. Is the target the individual or the community? The clarity of need. How clear is it what is needed in the community? The orientation. And this is it task-oriented or is it people-oriented? Who does it? Who tends to be the one that does it? What does it foster? Is there behavior change because of it? What is the duration, ideally? So how long does it last? Where do the resources come from to accomplish it? Ownership. So who owns it? And then any examples that come to mind. So when do you do it? The target, clarity of need, orientation, who does it, what's it foster, behavior change, duration, resources, and then examples. All right, so take some time in your two groups and walk through that. Actually, let's, just for sake of time, have this group be relief, or this group be development, and this group be relief. Okay, so you guys answer it for relief, you guys answer it for development. Go for it. Okay, you guys ready? All right, so why don't we get two scribes up there? So one for relief and one for development. And then we'll go through.
I don't know.
Remember, the root of scribe is scribble. Okay? You don't have to have good handwriting.
You can do this.
Okay, so relief, when to do. When ideally do you do relief?
I think the only time I could think of when to do relief is when the the people who are in need are either physically or mentally incapable of doing it. Like
Okay.
children can't drive a car, and you don't want to teach them how to drive a car because they're not capable of driving yet.
So it could be fun.
It could be fun.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how about in an emergency?
Or I guess that's that too.
Yeah. So like a major earthquake or a flood or.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So go ahead and put up there. Summarize that somehow. How about development? When do you do it?
It seems like basically every other time. Like every
Yeah.
time you're going in for missions that isn't some sort of emergency, you're going in to make it a lasting impression.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be consistent and ongoing.
Cool. All right.
I'm gonna put ongoing.
Ongoing. Cool. How about the target for relief? Individual or community?
For relief, I think it's primarily individual. Like, I would find like it's hard to find a community that you would provide relief to.
Yeah.
Mostly, I think it's mostly individual, although probably not all the time, not exclusively.
Yeah, so even if it's being done to a whole community, it tends to be relief is done kind of for the individual. It's providing food or providing shelter or providing something for them. So good. How about development?
And we were talking, you kind of empower individuals for the community, so it's like the community as a whole.
Good
but
job.
Through individuals.
Yep, that's perfect. Yeah, so that is, you do. You empower individuals. The way we say it is we're empowering individuals that will help change families and families that will help change communities. So, all right, clarity of need.
What did you mean by that again?
Are the needs when you're doing relief, is it clear what the needs are?
Like specific needs?
Yeah, and think of the emergency situation.
Yeah, I think whenever it's immediate
Yeah,
and it needs to be done well, like if you're in a situation where people's lives are immediately at stake,
Yeah.
then like if you're driving on a freeway, on a busy freeway, for example, you probably wouldn't want to be teaching your 16-year-old new driver. You'd probably want to be the one driving in that situation.
Yeah.
So when the needs are immediate and
yeah, so it's pretty clear.
like
Yeah.
quality is necessary.
Yeah, so if somebody doesn't have any food or anything, it's pretty clear. If they don't have food, they'll die. Yeah. Okay, how about development?
I think it would be less clear.
Yeah.
It would be less clear. You have to get in there and get to know them, be there with them until you can figure out, okay, this is what they need
Yes.
as you're doing it.
Good. Yeah, so yeah, it's definitely more murky. There's really cool lessons in this material that if you go through this training, and this is what we did before we moved to Africa, we went through a week-long training. It's called a training of trainers. And you're taught how to use all these lessons. And in there's these amazing lessons. And if we have time, I'll tell you about a couple of them. But the one about clarifying needs is amazing. And to see people in a community go through this lesson and then go, oh, this is our greatest need. And they've come to it without any arguing or debating. It's not sitting there sharing ideas. It's this practical way that they kind of discern what the need is. And so, yeah, it's much less clear. And for development, it takes time to mine down into what's really the real needs under the surface, because the surface needs usually aren't the real needs. All right, orientation. Is it task or people oriented? Yep.
People.
Yep. Who tends to do relief?
Usually organizations or like on a smaller scale, I guess like parents would,
Yeah. And it's oftentimes, oh, go ahead.
Government.
Yeah, governments, organizations, usually outsiders. It's usually people outside of the community who come in to do relief for a community. So you can put any of that, org, gov, outside. How about development?
I think typically it would be more people who are going there in a smaller community, smaller group that try and become part of their community.
Yeah. So it's usually from within.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. What does relief foster?
I guess it gets a single task done for every relief that's like every time someone does relief, it gets a single task done well. You know,
Okay.
with good quality.
But what tends to, what by foster, like what tends if and let's put it this way, if relief is done for a long time,
What it fosters, for needs to be met, it requires more people to do it because you need another person to do it again for you. And then another person to do it again,
Right.
And then eventually the end result would be no one learns anything, and it
Yeah.
just requires a lot of labor in order to do it.
so the no one learns anything is kind of the key to that. It fosters dependence. So people depending upon someone to come in and keep doing this stuff for them. Good. Development.
Empowerment,
Yeah.
basically.
Yep. Empowerment, independence. How about behavior change? Does relief tend to have behavior change?
No, it might encourage laziness.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very little behavior change. How about development?
Yeah.
Yep.
If it goes well, it should.
Yeah. And that's one of the cool things about this model of development that we learned is it's spiritual. Every week they teach a physical lesson and a spiritual lesson, and it makes such a huge difference. Like there are development programs that were in the communities that we came alongside that were, somewhat successful, like successful to a very small percentage of homes in the community. And people would ask us, how come this works? Like, why does this work so much better? And we tell them, it's the spiritual. Like, people are being changed from the inside, and so they're so motivated to pass on what they've learned, both physically and spiritually, because it comes from the heart, So yeah, massive change ends up happening. How about what's the ideal time for relief duration?
The ideal duration.
Yeah.
I guess immediately. It's like.
But for how long, ideally, do you want it to
okay.
last?
I mean, I guess for a long time. Like if you're trying to provide relief, if you're trying to meet the solution by providing relief, you'll have to continually do it.
Right, but ideally,
Ideally, you'd want it
as
small-
short,
a small time.
as small as possible.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, oftentimes it's done forever, and that's what creates dependence. The ideal scenario, because relief needs to happen. Ethiopia right now, the fact that we're getting rain today and the El Nino is hitting us is terrible for Ethiopia, because El Nino years for us when we get rain means drought in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is experiencing the biggest drought right now that it's had since the 80s, and they are going to have millions and millions of people dependent upon relief. And so the key to relief is, yes, it's needed, but you want it to last as short a time as possible so it doesn't then create dependence and break down people's empowerment. So yeah, short a time. How about development?
Well, the goal would be to foster empowerment and independence, so it would go on for
Ever.
as long as possible.
Yeah.
Forever.
Yeah. Yeah, so development, you can keep developing. Hopefully we all keep developing through the course of our whole lives. Where do the resources tend to come from for relief?
Outside.
Yep. How about development?
Inside.
Yep. Ideally, you want everything you start, you want the resources and development to come from inside the community. You want to use local resources because then it can continue forever. If it's outside, they're always going to be looking to the outside. Ownership, who tends to own it?
Someone outside.
Yeah, outsiders. How about ownership and
Yeah, and
development?
once again, it's the inside who's
Yep,
hopefully taking charge and owning it.
insiders. Good. Any examples of relief that come to mind?
I think of like the Flint water crisis.
Yeah.
In Michigan, where they can't get their own water. 'Cause
Yeah.
It's all messed up. So in that case, they need relief, like
Yep.
some outside source of water.
Good.
Perhaps also in a way like China tries to help in Africa.
Yeah.
To help the countries in a kind of
Yeah.
independence or
Yeah. No, China is doing everything it can to make Africa dependent upon them. Yeah. That's a good example. How about development?
I was thinking we went to Honduras the last 2 years, and it's cool because we get to visit a church that Calvary Chapel planted there.
Oh,
And the whole goal, and Shiloh's actually an MK from Papua New Guinea.
cool.
It's kind of the same idea, but they went in, they were a part of the people, they grew up a church, grew up leaders within the church, and then were able to come out and leave a healthy church that was running there, led by local people.
That's awesome. Right on. All right, good job. Give yourselves a hand. Um, all right, well, I'll tell you guys a little bit of the stories of what we've seen happen. But actually, I'll tell you first. So the way this stuff is used, there's a whole model of development. The whole thing is called CHE, Community Health Evangelism, CHE. It's a really cool model that when we learned it, it was kind of led by a single organization. So there's an organization in, where are they? Bakersfield, called Medical Ambassadors. Medical Ambassadors originally was Overseas Crusades medical mission. And then they hired a guy from Campus Crusade for Christ called Stan Rowland, and Stan Rowland came in and said, this medical mission stuff is great, but man, you guys need the gospel. You need to empower people. You need to help people know who the Holy Spirit is. Like, you guys need to take the spiritual and combine it with the physical, and then you'll really have something. And so Stan took all this Campus Crusade stuff, folded it in to community development stuff, and created a model that just works. And so when we first found out about it, this is how. We, on September 10th, 2001, took a couple UCSB students, our kids, Elijah was 5 at the time, so 5, 7, and 9. David Moore, Pastor David Moore, who's at New Covenant Church, a gal who was a missionary friend of mine from high school who'd been a nurse in the Philippines, whose dad was at the time pastor up at Berkeley Covenant, and I think that was about it. And then September 10th, 2001, we're boarding our flight in LAX, which put us boarding our flight in Atlanta on September 11, 2001, when the towers came down. And so we got stuck in Atlanta. First plane that left the nation on the 13th was the only plane that left the nation on the 13th, and it was our SAA flight. So we got out of the country on the first plane after September 11th. So we get to South Africa, whole world is kind of freaking out. It was a really interesting time to get there because everybody in South Africa, here they've got more people dying every day of AIDS at this point. They had 5.3 million people with AIDS in a nation of 43 million. People are dying left and right. They would find out, that we're Americans and hold us and weep because they so understood our suffering, because suffering was such a part of the nation of South Africa because of generations of white supremacy through apartheid. And so anyway, we get out there in these communities, 3 million people living in poverty out in the Cape Flats outside of Cape Town, and AIDS is completely lost. AIDS is like not even on people's radar because even though there's people dying every day, they can't feed their children. We're talking to people and we're saying, so what are the greatest needs in your community? And they're saying, we don't have jobs, we don't have food, there's all these orphans, we don't know what to do with them, and they went through, nobody had HIV on the top 5 list. So we come back and we're just going, oh my gosh, how do you address a need? Because we went over there to try to help with AIDS. How do you address a need that no one thinks is a need? And so we just started asking everybody we could find, anybody that had any missions experience, how would you address this? How would you address this? How would you address this? And finally, somebody from Calvary Chapel said, oh, there's this couple, they're coming in, they're working in Tanzania, Peter and Tammy Russell, you guys should get together with them. And they were down taking some classes at Fuller. And so we have them over and they, we asked them and they said, we don't know. Like, we're like, how do you address an urban mess with all these needs and the real needs that are killing people are lost in this sea of other needs? And they said, we don't really know. We work in rural settings and, it's not really our thing. But they said, it's funny you would ask that because, well, actually, let me rewind. So rewind, I'm at a wedding rehearsal dinner. So we had some Westmont students who were getting married and we're on State Street having dinner, the rehearsal dinner. I'm doing the wedding. And I turn to the guy next to me and ask him about this problem. And he goes, "Yeah, I don't really know." But he said, "It's funny, I just heard about a lady. She's a Kenyan doctor. She's working in Ethiopia. She got trained in this model of development that's effective in rural settings, went to Addis Ababa, got so overwhelmed by the needs in the urban slums that she applied it in the urban setting, and it worked." And he said, "It's really the only effective urban model of development I've ever heard of." And this woman's name is Florence Mwindi. So then the Russells come over. We're having dinner with the Russells. They're like, "We don't really know." But it's funny you would say that, because this lady just moved in next door to us in Fuller, in Pasadena, to take a class at Fuller. She's this Kenyan doctor working in Ethiopia. And my wife turns to the Russells and said, "Is her name Florence?" And Tammy's like, "How do you know that?" Because our God is a very big God. And the next thing you know, Florence and Festus Mwindi are sitting in our living room in Goleta teaching us Che. So God brought this Kenyan doctor working in the slums of Addis Ababa, who we heard about at a wedding rehearsal dinner, who move in and take a class next door to the Russells, who we don't even know. And the next thing you know, they're sitting in our living room teaching us about this model of development that ended up becoming this thing that has transformed thousands and thousands and thousands of people's lives in South Africa. Never think that God is too small. He is massive. He can do anything. He knows where everybody's at, and he ended up bringing us this couple. They taught us. We got 1 week of training. We moved to South Africa. It was brutal, so I don't know how well you got to know Elijah, but it was hard, 5 years for our poor children. South Africa's a mess. It's just got so many issues. But again, it's like we were able to train up this group of leaders there who began seeing transformation happen in their communities. And now, I don't have time to tell you, but I just wish I could tell you story after story. If you go to our website, it's bridgesworldwide.org, you can watch a video. If you click on, well, it's actually I think it's on the homepage, kind of on the left-hand side of the homepage. Maybe I should just show it to you. It'll actually kind of show you what we're doing there. Yeah, there's time. All right, I'll just show it to you. Can you get me online?
She's got it right here.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so we're kids. Okay, click here. So there's a church in Orange County called Rock Harbor. And last January, they came down and made this video for us. It's a great use of a short-term team. That's supposed to be 1,000. So that woman who just spoke, Sasanda, was a volunteer leader in the after-school program when Zelinda Lay was a primary school student and came to Christ. All those leaders came through our program as volunteers who served 6 to 12 months as volunteers, and then out of all the hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, we've hired some of them as staff. All right, I think we're done. Just goes so fast. Let me pray for you guys. Father, we thank you. I thank you that, Lord, in our lives, in every area, Lord, there's opportunities to empower others. And it's really just discipleship. It's a model of empowering people spiritually and physically to make a difference in your world. And I pray for each of these leaders, Lord, that you will give them opportunity, Lord, people in their lives that they can pour into, those that they can equip and empower, who will bring about change in the world that you have placed them in. So we just commit, Lord, our paths to you. We thank you that you are a great God, a mighty God who's able to do more than we could hope, dream, or even imagine. And we thank you that we get to be a part of all the great things that you're doing, in spite of the fact that, Lord, we're just human and fallible and broken. And so we thank you for that, and we commit ourselves to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Right on. Thanks for letting me come.
Thanks for coming.
My pleasure.